Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Mayo Perlaza, and today I am very excited to share this presentation on perception. Let's dive right into this fascinating topic of perception, and more importantly, let's dive into the concept or construct of the perception gaps and how these gaps impact or contribute to the misunderstandings that we have between our interpersonal communication with those that we love, those that we work, those that we go to the gym with, those that we interact at our daily conversations, even our dogs, even our gods, everything deals with perception. So let's dive into it. And as well, we can learn today practical strategies to address these gaps so that we can communicate more effectively and importantly, to strengthen our relationships with those that we love. Let's go right in. Today's learning outcomes are clearly defined. Number one, we will define what perception is and its stages. Number two, we will identify the factors that influence perception. Number three, we will understand the perception gap and what it means on the impact that it has in our communication with those that we love. And number four, we will apply perception checking strategies. What a mouthful. Let me say that again. We will apply perception checking strategies to improve our interpersonal communication skills and to improve our connection with those that we love. So, what is perception? Let's start with the basics. Perception is a process. Let's not forget that perception is a process by which we interpret sensory information in which we make sense of this sensory information to give rise to our interpretation of our world. So again, perception is a process by which we interpret sensory information to make sense of our environment. Perception, it is not the same as sensation. It is so important to differentiate the difference between perception and sensation because sensation is the raw data that you gather with your senses. Here, 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 here. Your whole body has a sensory organ or a sensory organism that is there to interpret this raw data. Perception is what your brain and what your essence as a human being does to first organize this information, secondly, interpret this information, and third, and perhaps most importantly, to give it meaning to you. So again, sensation is the raw data that your senses receive, while perception is what your brain and your essence as a being does to organize that information, to interpret it, and to make meaning of it. For example, let's imagine that you're sitting at a board meeting or some office and there is a laughter down the hall. You hear this laughter, ha ha. Okay, well, maybe not be like that, but there is a laughter, and you sense it, and you can hear it right through your apparatus, and you say, I'm interpreting that as perhaps a kind or a warm-hearted laughter. Well, that laughter might not be so warm-hearted, so you may adapt your perception and you may think maybe this person is sarcastic or there might be a tone of malignant, which I wouldn't have that. But that's not me perceiving. This is a random example. In this scenario, your sensation of the sound, which is reaching your ears or your overall body as an organism, as a sensory organism, that is allowing you to listen to that, then you're perceiving this information and you are assigning a meaning to it in which you're saying this laughter has either this or this quality. It is crucial to understand that perception is subjective. This means that two people will receive the same information. Let's go back to the example of us being in this boardroom or in a meeting, and two of us heard that laughter out in the corner of our room, somewhere over there. And the way that I perceive it is not the same as the way that you will perceive it. That's because the whole experience of the same situation can be interpreted, can be assigned a different meaning. And this is where perception gaps occur. Now, before I get into perception gaps, I want to take a look at the different types of perception and how they all work in conjunction with one another. Number one, it is your sense of touch, your tactile. It is so beautiful to, well, I per se like getting into the dirt and doing gardening. I love gardening. I love the feeling of the soil, of the plants, of the roots, of really integrating with that. My perception of that is this one connection with the world. That's just me. Number two, there is your perception of sight. It's so beautiful to be able to see, and it's so beautiful to be able to perceive all of the different colors, all the different light variations, all the different shapes. It is such an amazing thing to have at our disposal. For those that have it, for those that don't, it doesn't mean that we cannot see. But with this sensory apparatus, we're able to see through sights, to see through shapes. And I encourage you to always expand that capacity by peering into the unknown. The next one is your hearing. That's correct. I love the fact that we can all have a different set of interpretations when it comes to sound. Again, let's go back to the example of the laughter and how I hear someone laughing with joy, but you may hear someone laughing in a sarcastic manner. We will bridge our gap in a little bit once we interpret what this means based on the following constructs. Number four is the gustatory. This is such a beautiful word to say. It just makes you feel like you know what you're talking about when you have this gustatory, with this mouth-filling sensation of quenching your thirst, or salty or sweet, or whatever it is that you're having a need to munch on in this moment. It will satiate your thirst. A couple of words there for you to think on. The next one is the overall sense of smell. And it is said that we can smell into our past experiences. That's correct. I remember once smelling a flower much like this one right here, and having a memory come up in which I was running through the fields in my hometown where I was born in Colombia. I won't share much more about that in this presentation, so let's move on. The next one is beautiful proprioception. Another magical word today, proprioception. And proprioception is the overall conjunction of how your body interprets the movement of one muscle to tell your brain that you are going to raise your left hand to pick that apple, to then bring to your mouth to chew, and to have the remaining process of digesting and synthesizing and so forth and so on. And then the last one is motion, actual movement itself, how we may be catching a ball in the middle of the air, or how we may be, again, reaching for that apple, just the actual act of movement, of motion, of us moving through the wind as we ride our bikes, moving through life as we see all these colorful experiences. Let's move on. Perception has three different stages. And today I want to talk to you about selection, organization, and interpretation. Are you ready? Great, here we go. The selection process is quite wonderful. That's because we can't possibly focus on everything that is happening at once. We cannot focus on all the information, on all the raw data. So therefore, we have to filter it. We have to select what seems most important to us. For example, in a noisy, crowded street like this one you see here, you might tune out all of the background chatter so that you can focus on your friend's voice, because it is such a sweet voice, such voice of friendship, of dear feeling of adornment. Organization happens in a different style, in a different way. Because once you've selected the information, now you're going to organize it in a pattern or categories that make sense to you. For example, when you meet someone new, such as in the space behind me, and you think, wait a minute, I know that person's face. Is it me that's recognizing the face, or is it my apparatus, my whole being, that is doing this organization into patterns and categories in which I somehow see their features of the nose and their eyes and the way they stand, and I think, That person, I don't know who he is or who she is, but they have a friendly essence about them. And next is interpretation. This happens in the final stage of perception, in which we assign meaning to the information. This stage is important because our personal biases, our emotions, and the experiences from our past may influence our understanding. So, interpretation is a little complicated because of how it can weigh differently based on the biases that we hold, the emotions that we hold, or the experiences that have made or may have impacted us in the past, and therefore may be coloring our present moment of interpreting this raw data. Sorry, I'm back. Now let's take a look at the factors that influence persuasion, such as the physiological factors, the psychological factors, the social norms, and cultural factors that constrain who we are. Physiological factors such as your mood, your energy levels, your physical state may color the way that you interpret situations. Your psychological factors, such as your past experiences, your expectations, and your biases, also play a role. For example, let's say that if you expect someone, such as your professor, to be rude, you might interpret this type of behavior as negative. But that's your interpretation. Again, no two people may interpret or perceive the same scenario as uh, assigning that information or assigning that value to the professor's gestures. By the way, I'm not that. I'm kind of nice. So trust me, you'll never see me cross my hands. And number three, your social and cultural norms. They impact who you are because they impart expectations on how you view certain behaviors. So, for example, a gesture in some part of the world may be considered as welcoming or as polite, as in, like, great, this is fine. But trust me, I've been in situations as I traveled through over 40 countries in which it is a negative connotation. You want to stay away from all these cultural appropriations that you don't know about. Understanding where the perception gap grows. Here's where things get a little bit interesting because the perception gap happens when two people interpret the same situation in different ways. Remember, we talked about this maybe 3 or 4 times already in this presentation, how two people may be interpreting the same situation in two different ways. And that gives us two different perceptions. There's a gap between these perceptions. For example, imagine receiving a text message that says, we need to talk. We need to talk. Wait a minute. We need to talk. How? It's written, we need to talk. But my perception is maybe this is really serious and it's quite worrisome. What do they want to talk about? While the other person might grab the phone and says, "Oh my gosh, okay, cool. I will write you right back. Let me just answer you. I love to talk to you. When do you want to talk?" So neither of those two interpretations are necessarily wrong or right. They're just simply influenced by our unique experiences and, of course, the way we communicate internally. The perception gap is super problematic, particularly problematic in interpersonal communication because it creates conflict. If we have two different modes of perception, then we're having to solve the conflict, the differences between us. And this conflict or this gap can easily erode trust. So if we leave the gap on its own, the gap will create more distancing. But if we rather use strategies like we will in a second to bridge the gap, we will find more opportunities to connect meaningfully with those that we love. So here are the perception checking strategies. These involve 3 simple steps. In 1, you describe, 2nd, you interpret, and 3, you clarify. So for example, you describe what it's happening, what you're observing without adding any judgment. You interpret the situation, perhaps give it 2 possible interpretations, such as the laughter. Maybe that man who is laughing in such a joyous way had a beautiful morning. Or maybe that man who is laughing in such a way it's hiding something from him or herself. That behavior seems a little bit sketchy. And number three, why not just go ahead and clarify by asking the question, hey, excuse me, I noticed, actually, I heard you laughing from across the room, and your laughter was so contagious that I had to come and ask, are you just so joyous about your life that you can't hold yourself? What drives you to laugh in such an abundant way? So, number one, I noticed, right? I noticed by describing that which I observe. Number two, I go ahead and interpret the possible scenarios by giving it two or more interpretations. And number three, I clarify that by sharing my thoughts and asking questions to confirm all the interpretations, all of the describing moments that I just had, and to clarify where the question comes together and bridges this gap so that there is no more differences in our interpretation, but rather a conjunction of that. Okay, last but not least, actually, there's one more slide before this one. So today I want to encourage you to do a self-reflection. Think about a recent misunderstanding that you had with someone. Think about it. Okay, I already got one. What caused this perception gap? Was it due to differencing expectations? Was it due to your cultural norms and their cultural norms? Or was it due to some personal biases about each other? Consider, more importantly, how you can use perception checking strategies to address this misunderstanding. You can take a couple of moments, you can pause the video, you can pause the video to reflect on whether or not the perception gap was created due to the difference of experiences, the difference of cultural norms, or the personal biases that may be limiting both of you from bridging this gap. Write down your reflections. I encourage you, if you're comfortable, then to discuss them with your partner, your friend, your coworker, or anyone who you feel close to. I want to thank every one of you for sitting, standing, writing, whatever it is that you were doing during this presentation on perception, because perception is such a powerful, powerful entity in our lives. It plays a role in how we interact with the world and with each other. So by understanding the stages of perception, by recognizing the factors that influence it, and applying perception checking strategies, you can reduce misunderstandings and improve that gap so that your relationships can grow into one beautiful, wholesome relationship. Thank you so much for your time. I encourage you to reflect. I encourage you to reflect on your perceptions and how they may be impacting your communication. Because the more that you reflect, the more that you understand how your perceptions shape your world, the more that you can grow to a beautiful human being. Have a beautiful day. Once again, my name is Mayo Perlaza, and I thank you for being here with me today.